Of course, you won't be able to vote if you drop off.
Technically, that is not true. At least not today, because of the way I'm going to do voting.
Right. Sorry. New voting procedure. Yes.
And in theory, everybody who has entered the room counts as having attended. So you would all have been acceptable. Okay. Can folks hear me okay?
Yeah, I think some people are having sound issues, but at least on my side, you come across very clear.
Okay. I think that's always a bit of an issue for some people. And unfortunately, there's not a lot we can do about it. I apologize. Okay, so here's the organizations who I think can vote this time. So Atos, Argonne, Basel, CEA, Cisco, Edinburgh, Fujitsu, HLRS, HPE, INRIA, Intel, Livermore, Los Alamos, NVIDIA, Ohio State, Oak Ridge, Paratools, Riken, Sandia, TU Munich, TU Wien, Tennessee Tech, UAB, UIUC, UNN. Lots of U's. RWTH is also here, but this is the first time Mark Andres attended a voting meeting in a while. So, and then the other orgs at the bottom there are not present. So they will not be eligible today. So as we said, I think most people weren't on yet, but according to the rules that I'm going to read in a minute, this does count as a regular voting meeting. So this will count towards your eligibility for the next voting meeting, which will be in about a month and a half, I guess close to 2 months, assuming our votes pass today. We will have our usual June meeting, but we will be holding it virtually according to the rules we hope to pass today. Technically, this meeting is taking place according to the rules we hope to pass today. So, so if you are attending for the first time today, you could be eligible to vote at that meeting as well, and so you can attend that. As long as we're talking about logistics, let me show you. One quick note, just like I mentioned in the December meeting, I think. Now that NVIDIA and Mellanox have completed their merger, they will participate as one organization in the forum. I think this is pretty clear to everybody, but I just like to make a note when these things happen. So when you look at attendance or voting records or things, you understand what's going on there. So those two organizations are now one. And what was I going for? Last thing. So the way voting will happen today, I previously said we were going to use Doodle for voting. Jeff educated me that there are better options out there, which make it a little easier for both you to vote because you have fewer things to fill out, and me to count the votes because it makes it harder for anybody to vote twice on accident or to type in the wrong organization or whatever. So after I finish the reading today, I will send everyone a quick email. I have a script that'll do it automatically. And that email will give you a voting link that you can use and only you can use, which will automatically fill out your name and your organization. And you can vote for the one thing we are voting for today. This is not a complicated vote. So you will have, I'm going to be really generous here. Everybody gets 24 hours just so there's plenty of time for us to fix any problems if anybody has any issues. And then I'll close the vote tomorrow at approximately this time. Actually, I think the vote will close itself tomorrow at approximately this time. I'll count up the votes and send the results to the mailing list and post them on the website, just like usual. So once we finish the reading in a few minutes here, look for that email and you can vote anytime over the next day. And again, as usual, if you have any questions on that, feel free to send me an email or a message on the Slack channel, and I can try and help you out with that. But hopefully, it's all pretty clear and easy. And your name and organization will be just like you put them in the registration. So if there's any issues on that, it's your fault, not mine. But let me know if there's a problem and we can try and fix that.
So Wesley, I assume if you send out the link and somebody ignores it, and doesn't vote, that will count as an abstain. So if too many people ignore their emails, that thing will fail too, correct?
Yes, that is correct. So that's a good point. So back to this voting page I had a minute ago. So we have 27 eligible organizations to vote today. We need 21 yes or no votes for this ballot to meet ballot quorum. So we can't have too many abstains, just like always. So yes, please do vote. It will only take you a second. There's only one question, and then hit the submit button.
If you want to abstain, that's fine, but please do it consciously by voting abstain.
That's true. It still doesn't count toward ballot quorum, but it at least tells us that you saw the email.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Again,
And if you
you have
don't
any
see the email,
questions,
please go check your spam folder.
yes, that's true. So the email should be coming from the email that I generally use on the forum lists now. So it'll be work@westplan.com. Hopefully it doesn't go into a spam folder. I believe I wrote my magic scripts to do all of the things folders, but yes, keep an eye out for that.
So, so Wesley, just for clarification, if you had more than one person register from one organization, you picked one, you picked the usual one?
Yes, that's a good point. I forgot to mention that. So I don't have a good way to resolve that for people. So if you have two people from your organization, and there are a few that do, please talk to the other people from your organization and decide who will actually do the vote. It is not necessary and it is not encouraged for every single person to vote. Just one from your organization will be plenty. If we do get 2 votes, I will take a random one, probably. I'm not going to tell you which one I will take because I don't know. But I will just pick one. Maybe the one I like better. I don't know. But please just don't make that a problem. Probably I'll just pick the last one. But it's a lot easier if we just don't make the mistake. And unfortunately, there's less I can do to avoid that because I don't know which of you would be doing the vote in the case where we have multiple.
Everybody gets so if you have more than one from one organization, everybody gets the email, correct?
Right. Just like when we're at an in-person meeting and I call out a company and you guys have all decided who's going to do the voting, you can do so now as well. I assume you all have some way to communicate with each other. And if you don't know who else is here from your organization, the attendance is always posted online. Find it. Who all is here? We have quite a few this time. All right. Any other questions? Okay. So we do have an official agenda for this meeting, it being an official meeting and all. So the only thing on the official agenda is that I'm going to read the exceptional procedures proposal. Everything else will just be by the seat of our pants, I suppose. We'll after we're done with the official business, we'll go back to what we have been working on with the issues related to bills passed through the standard for editor changes. So let me go to the pull request for procedures and make this a little bigger. All right. So in general, there's 2 main things that I've done as part of this pull request, as part of this proposal. So first is to create a new notion of a type of meeting, which is an exceptional virtual meeting. So that's the meeting we're in right now because we have no way to bootstrap or new procedures without having a voting meeting. We just had to decide we're going to have a voting meeting. There was no good way to get around that. But we are following the rules that we're proposing here for this new type of meeting. So this is an emergency or an exceptional virtual meeting. This is a voting meeting and essentially functions the same way that our physical meetings do, just that everything is done online. And so the main changes I made to the rules document were to add the definition of this new type of meeting, and then everywhere where we discuss physical meetings throughout the document, change that from physical to voting. And you can see an example of that here, where I changed physical to voting, because everything we do at a physical meeting, we can do at a voting meeting. There's some advice that I'll show you a little bit later that says perhaps for some of these emergency exception, I'm going to get that wrong every time, exceptional virtual meetings, that the initial thought was that we would try to focus these on smaller items and not try and go through larger proposals. But as it seems more and more likely that we may be doing these for 1 or 2 or 3 or however many of these meetings we end up doing, we can of course make changes there. There's no binding text that says we can't do anything specific at an exceptional virtual meeting. There was really just guidance that says this is what we suggest. So those are the two main changes, adding those definitions and then changing physical to voting everywhere else. So I plan to read the larger changes where I added definitions and things like that. All of the smaller things where I changed physical to voting, I'm not going to go through in the larger PDF, but you can see them here on the pull request. And there are links to the pull request on the agenda page if you don't have that. Nothing has changed here from what I read at the last virtual meeting 2 weeks ago. Sorry, I guess we had a virtual meeting last week, but I read this 2 weeks ago, I believe. So if you were present for that, it's all the same. But yeah, you can scan through here really quickly and see the changes I made. There were also a couple of places where we had misspellings or forgot the word MPI, and I did make a few of those tweaks as well. But for the most part, everything you're going to see is going to be changing physical to voting, and then the definitions that I'll read now. Any questions on that from a high-level perspective before I start reading the PDF? Okay. So then I'll go ahead and get started. So in the first chapter, we have some definitions of various terms that we use in the procedures document. And so I've added this new definition for an exceptional virtual MPI forum meeting. So this is an open meeting of the entire MPI forum and general public in a virtual location versus a physical meeting. Further rationale and details are in section 3.4. I didn't want to spell out the entire contents of an exceptional virtual meeting in this small little section. And then the second change there is just changing a physical MPI forum meeting to a voting MPI forum meeting. So this is any MPI forum meeting where official ballots may be conducted. This could include either physical or this could include either a physical or exceptional virtual MPI forum meeting. So that's a new term, a voting MPI forum meeting. So at the top we have physical, then we have virtual, then we have exceptional virtual, and then voting kind of puts physical and exceptional virtual together. And to answer your question, Guillaume, in the procedures document, we don't use the MPI macro. We just didn't think it was worth putting all that together for the procedures document, I suppose, when Jeff and Martin wrote this originally.
Wesley, what?
Yes.
What's the difference between a virtual MPI forum meeting and an exceptional virtual? Whichever the other phrase was.
A virtual MPI forum meeting cannot have voting. An exceptional virtual meeting can.
That's not actually spelt out here. It's just the two phrases are basically identical, right? With it says an open meeting.
So the definition of exceptional virtual is a mirror of the definition of physical, just inverting virtual and physical. And then the definition that says it's voting is in the voting MPI forum meeting section down here. So actually, if you look at the definition of physical MPI forum meeting, we also don't call out the fact that you can have votes in that sort of meeting. So that was one of the reasons I added the extra definition for a voting MPI forum meeting, because that way throughout the document, I could make it clear which meetings you're allowed to vote in and which meetings you're not by just saying a voting meeting. And then this tells you a voting meeting is a physical or exceptional virtual meeting.
So in which case you should either say that all physical MPI forum meetings are voting meetings, and then the same sort of phrase for the exceptional virtual ones, or you should call out that the virtual ones are not voting, cannot be, must not be. Is that true? Is that always going to be true? Every physical meeting is a voting meeting. Every exceptional one is exceptional because it's a voting meeting. That's the reason for putting the word exceptional in there.
Yeah, that's the definition that I was hoping that this already conveyed with the definition of voting meeting, because it does say this could include either physical or exceptional virtual.
Yeah, I think what Dan is shooting for is the include part, right? Include could also include more than that.
I see what you're saying. It does say could, not must,
Right.
or
Must.
shall, and it doesn't specifically exclude a virtual meeting.
Yeah, you could make that sentence say a voting meeting is either a physical meeting or an exceptional virtual meeting. It's one of those two. It's nothing else.
But not a virtual MPI meeting, yeah.
Yes, but not an ordinary virtual meeting or something. Yes, because otherwise we're saying that the difference between a virtual meeting and an exceptional virtual meeting is that we choose to make voting happen in it. In which case there is actually only physical and virtual, and we choose then whether the physical one becomes voting by making it a voting meeting as well, and we choose whether the virtual one is an exceptional one by adding voting to it.
So
you don't need three categories if there's.
yeah,
Well, you don't need 4 categories, whatever. It just needs to be more explicit.
the better way to say that would be all physical and exceptional virtual MPI forum meetings are voting meetings, and virtual MPI forum meetings are not voting meetings.
Yeah, either that way or the other way. I think it doesn't matter which way around. The sense is, yeah, voting meetings are.
Yeah, maybe
this or that, but
slightly
not
more clear if I do it this.
It doesn't matter to me, but yeah, something definite.
Okay.
Wesley,
That does make things a little more clear. Yep.
I'm wondering, is it correct to assume that voting MPI forum meetings also include readings?
Yes. So in the rest of the document, everywhere where we said physical, that's been changed to voting. And so that includes places where we say readings may occur at physical meetings, now says readings may occur at voting meetings.
Got it. Okay.
I mean, that's if you're already changing the text, and the official ballots may happen, right? You could add the readings here too. It's not just the ballots that happen.
I think even if you were to say official business, I think it would cover all of it. Do we use that terminology?
That would be new terminology, I think, that we would have to define again.
So again, this particular definition is not the entire definition of a voting meeting or any of the other definitions in here. The definition of a physical meeting is a whole chapter. And now a voting meeting is a whole chapter. So this isn't meant to be exhaustive. It is meant to be a short summary so that we can use the term elsewhere. But the definition of what happens in those meetings is all of chapter 3.
So that's a good point. Perhaps we should go through that text first and then decide whether we think the front ones need to be amended.
Right. Okay. Then why don't I continue, and then we'll see if there's anything else that needs to change. So I did add a small section at the beginning of chapter 3 before the definition of a physical meeting to just talk about general rules that apply to meetings. So the scheduling of future voting meetings may only occur during a voting meeting to allow time for both planners and attendees to prepare for the meeting. In the event that no future meetings are planned, For example, the attendance of previous voting meetings did not meet the meeting quorum. An exceptional virtual meeting may be scheduled outside of a virtual meeting with at least 4 weeks of notice to the MPI forum. So this was something that came up during one of our previous unofficial readings of this text, that we need to have a good way to schedule these sorts of meetings. In particular, if we can't meet quorum because of travel restrictions or whatever else that has become increasingly likely, we need some way to be able to bootstrap these sorts of discussions again in the future, because we didn't have a way to do that for today's meeting. So we just had to invent some rules for this meeting, and we're trying to follow them here, other than the 4-week deadline, because we just don't have enough time to do that, and make sure that we are going to be okay for the June meeting.
So I can make one comment here real quick, just to make sure that nobody gets worried here for no reason. This is really just clarifications of when we can do this to give us a little bit more reasoning of when we do things. If things, or once things go back to quote unquote normal, the idea is to stick with the old method of like once a year deciding ahead of time the meetings. This is not the idea of changing it, or we'll always decide the next one at the previous meeting. So this is really just an intention to deal with these emergencies now in the right way.
Correct. Yeah, and even with these sorts of exceptional virtual meetings, we can still schedule more than one at once. We don't have to do it ad hoc every few months. We just need to have some way of defining what's the minimum time.
The idea doesn't come out of the blue. The forum decides when to meet next, when it can actually make decisions. That's the idea.
I have a minor point here. There's a bit of a loophole here that it doesn't say who can call meetings. So, for example, I could call an exceptional virtual meeting with weeks of advance notice of the forum, regardless of whether Martin or Wesley or any of the other leadership agrees.
Yep, that's true.
I mean, if people don't agree, then
It
I
doesn't
think you're
say.
trying to speak, but you're very, very quiet.
Oh, I got to put my mic back. Yeah, I was just saying if people disagree with what's happening, then you can always use quorum as a check against that kind of thing.
Yep, that's true.
It still could be used, a loophole, to split the standard into halves, right? Technically.
Yeah.
Yeah, and also if we had a rogue leaker at any point, then this could be used to anybody could call a meeting, and as long as you had sufficient quorum behind you, you could take the majority of the group with you and ditch the rogue leader. So,
Yeah, if we all didn't like Martin's leadership, this is our way of getting rid of him.
it's obviously not aimed at Martin, but sometime in the future.
I don't really see this happening, but I did want to just point out the loophole.
I think this is a feat.
Yeah, if we've got problems like that, I don't think that we're going to solve them with this document.
Forward to the MPI
Says
uprising.
Jim, the leader of the mutiny. Yeah.
That's right. Everyone join my private Slack channel.
The JMPI forum.
Good with a
Yeah.
pirate gear. I think Jeff could be an actor with a kerchief over his head and
I should have brought my. Okay.
It also doesn't specify how to give notice. Is that via the email list, or is that by a notice board? With a notice on the door saying "Beware of the tiger." It's
Big X on the trash can on my street corner.
Oh, you have
about
to
right.
draw the little parallelograms.
Yeah. At some point, we have to apply some common sense here. Or
Right.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, we would do this in the ways, today we would do this in the ways we do it today. So we would announce things on the mailing list. I would post things on the website. We would do all the usual things. I don't want to overprescribe, because tomorrow, if we decide that we want to use smoke signals for all communication for the MPI forum, we should be able to do that.
We should just register the domain mpibcast.com and put all notices there.
Sounds good.
depends whether you want quorum or not, really, doesn't it?
We can do anything if we don't care about quorum.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and keep moving because this is fun, but we do have a lot of people here. All right, so here is the new definition of the meeting we are in now. So this is the definition for an exceptional virtual MPI forum meeting. So there is some rationale here that is obviously specific to right now. The original intention of this text was that we would be putting in this section, and then once we go back to quote unquote normal, this section would be removed. I think based on some of the discussions we've had recently, I don't think we will do that. Whether or not this is a type of meeting we use going forward, in another year or two, we'll see. But I think it's still helpful to have this rationale here to emphasize that we do still, in general, see the value of physical meetings, and we do want to try and get back to using them if we can. And in the future, if we decide that's maybe not the way we want to go, we can make another change. It's relatively easy to make changes to this document, particularly for things like rationale. But I wanted to go ahead and leave that in. So I'll go ahead and read what I have. Rationale. This section is an addendum specifically included to mitigate the impact of the COVID-19 outbreak on the business of the MPI Forum and its upcoming ratification of MPI 4.0. It is not intended for use in the future without further extenuating circumstances. So now the normative text. An exceptional virtual MPI Forum meeting is a virtual only or mixed physical and virtual meeting of the MPI Forum where official business may take place. Unlike physical MPI Forum meetings, such meetings will usually be limited in scope and are not intended to include larger plenary sessions due to the lack of discussion bandwidth facilitated by in-person meetings. These meetings are intended to encompass the following MPI Forum business: short proposal readings, for example, errata, voting, procedural business, and other discussion. Voting eligibility for exceptional virtual MPI Forum meetings is determined via the OOE and iMove rules described in Chapter 2. Meeting registration takes place to determine an organization's OOE status, and attendance will be determined before beginning the first ballot of the meeting. Due to special circumstances, it may be possible that physical meetings have low attendance for a period of time, and participation of a sufficient number of people to have a useful discussion and fulfill meeting quorum requirements could be difficult. In such circumstances, the MPI Forum chair may specify that a physical MPI Forum meeting observe the rules of an exceptional virtual MPI Forum meeting. So,
Wesley, should the word
Yep.
Should the word fulfill be fulfilling?
No,
It's
I
a
don't
long
think so.
sentence.
It is a very long sentence, but I don't think so. So let me address a couple of comments that have come up on the pull request and that we've had in previous discussions. We kind of note at the end and a little at the beginning, an exceptional virtual MPI Forum meeting may in fact be both physical and virtual in the event that, for instance, if we decide we are going to meet in September, but there are still quite a few people who cannot attend, we will still conduct that meeting as if it were virtual, and some of the people will happen to sit in the same place. So that is one of the flexibilities we're trying to build in here. Another is that while there's a lot of text in here that guides us towards shorter proposal readings and things that are perhaps easier to discuss in this environment with a WebEx, there's nothing that says we are not allowed to do larger proposals. And as Jim pointed out, the longer we are in this circumstance, the more likely it is that we will need to do that and potentially even ratify the MPI standard this way. And so that is why the rest of the proposal that I didn't necessarily read every word here, but throughout the text, I did change physical meeting to voting meeting so that everything we do at a physical meeting can be done at a voting meeting. And we will of course decide the agenda as we go to each meeting. So this doesn't prevent those things. This was guidance towards things that we think are going to be more productive in those meetings, but we can make that decision on a case-by-case basis. And it does, it was written to somewhat mirror the text we already have for a physical meeting, where we give guidance on what should happen at physical meetings. Virtual meetings, there's no particular guidance other than to say they're not official meetings, so you can do anything you want. Okay, any other questions or comments here?
Sounds good. I think you can move on.
Well, actually, that's the end of it. So then the only question is, having read the rest of this now, do you still want to see this change back in the first chapter, changing the definition of voting meeting to include all physical and exceptional virtual, well, these two sentences. The virtual meetings are not voting meetings, and physical and exceptional meetings are voting meetings.
What does the longer definition of virtual meeting look like? Different section.
You mean in this chapter 3?
Yes. Yes, I do.
Yep. So that's here. Hopefully that's readable. It's a lot of guidance, but in general, it says no voting or official readings take place during virtual meetings. At least that's the part that is specifically applicable here. So in the definition of physical, it does say that you can have voting. In the definition of an exceptional virtual, it also says you can have voting. And then in the definition of virtual, it says you cannot have voting.
That covers it for me, yeah. That's fine.
Okay. I would certainly prefer not to have to make changes, because then I have to go change the ballot and add a no vote. And I don't want to do that. Okay. Any other comments or dissenting opinions? Are people okay with me dropping this this change we talked about?
I'm okay with you dropping it.
I have no objection.
Great. Deleted. Okay. Then unless people want me to go through and show you every place I change physical to voting, I think this is considered read and we can go ahead and vote on this. Like I said, everything is posted on the pull request. So if you want to see any more details, you have 24 hours to look through this and let me know if there's any issues that you see. Obviously, I'm not going to make any changes at this point because I've read it and people will start voting on it. So I can't make any changes, but of course, if there's tiny spelling things and whatever, we can consider that an editor change and make that after the fact. But yeah, please look through that and then cast your ballot. Yep.
Let me add something else here too. I mean, we're getting a little bit into uncharted territory that we haven't been dealing with before, right? The rules before that we wrote up was always, we have done things like this. We want to now codify it basically and roll it up. This is really something new. I personally consider this somewhat of an experiment and see how it goes, because we don't have any other choice right now. We wouldn't do this if we would have another choice. So I easily see if you see something doesn't work or doesn't fit quite, then we'll adjust it as needed, right? So don't consider this like written in stone. This is what we're going to do for always going forward. I think it's a great first attempt to deal with the current situation. But we'll, of course, all as a group monitor if the rules work for us this way, and if not, then we'll have a procedure to change them. It is a bit unusual because we're not doing something that we have tried out before. This is going to be new for everybody, and so I think we just have to jump in the cold water and try it.
The water might be warm.
We'll all find out together in June, I suppose.
It may be boiling hot. That's true.
I think if today's meeting is any indication, we're going to be just fine.
I hope so. I think so. So if you have to adjust small details, so be it. Just wanted to point this out, since normally we have been doing things that, like writing things up that we have been always doing like this, just to make sure that we agree on the process. This is something new. So that's why I want to make the point.
So with that being said, I'm going to send out the emails now. And you'll all be getting them in the next few seconds, I hope. So please go ahead and look for those and cast your ballot. Like I said, those will close tomorrow at about 10 o'clock US Central Time. So you've got 23 and a half hours or so. So that is the end of, there it is. The end of the agenda as far as the emergency virtual meetings stuff goes. So from here on, all we've really planned so far is continuing the editorial changes discussions. I also had one other issue that I could do an unofficial reading for. I didn't announce it in time to do an official reading, but it's relatively small, and so given that we don't have that many things to discuss on the editor list, we could go through that as well if people see things. Does anyone else have anything that they'd like to discuss today? I can put on the agenda for the rest of the time.
So I have two quick things I wanted to mention, Wesley. One thing, going through particular the tickets that have the requirement that all chapter chairs look at. I added a new tag to the pull requests that we only had basically ready for vote, and we had goes to editor. I added an immediate one ready for chapter committee review in case someone of the chapter committee does it. So if you see that typically tags the chair of the chapter committee, and then it requires other folks here. This is the new one. It requires the chapter committee to take a look at that before it goes to Bill for merging. I think that was the procedure we discussed for that. So if you wonder why this is there, this is the reason. That's the one thing I wanted to point out in for the larger procedural things.
So one thing to add to that, the author of the pull request can put that label on there, and that'll be helpful as an indicator for Bill to say this isn't ready yet, that the chapter committee chairs or the committee or whoever is asked to does need to kind of sign off on this to say that they're all okay with it. And I would suggest that the best way to indicate that this is ready to go is that when the author has enough reviews from the chapter committee that they're comfortable, you can remove that label by clicking on it again here and click to be merged, and that says this is ready to go, and that Bill can go ahead and click that button to merge it when he's ready to do that. Right. And of course, you'll have to go through the usual merge conflicts or anything if that comes up, but you can work on that when that does come up.
This is, of course, intended for things that are not supposed to be voted on by the forum. So those are chapter committee changes that we decided on as a group would be chapter committee changes.
Correct. All right, anything else anybody wants to add to the list before we start working on this? So just as a reminder, let me filter out the so we can see what people need to work on. So there are still 15 issues that are in progress from people that count as errata or full proposals. So if you have one of those, please continue to work on that. Go ahead and create that request so we can discuss it and have it ready in June, and we can get as many of these things into MPI 4.0 as possible. And of course, if you have something that doesn't necessarily need to be discussed by the forum, but does need to be implemented, a lot of those go to Bill, but a lot of those are being worked on by others as well. And if we all wait until the last 2 weeks to get those done, they aren't going to get done because that eventually does create a bottleneck. So please, whenever you have some time, go ahead and start ticking those off. Most of those are going to be pretty small. So hopefully you can take care of them relatively quickly. All right. So then, Martin, you've got the only one on the list to be read today. You want to go through this one?
Yeah, this is pretty straightforward. We actually discussed this already, I think 2-3 weeks ago. There's the sentence in the IO chapter that equates POSIX read and write with the MPI file read and write. There were 3 lines in the text, and we decided that as a group that we wanted to A, this be a chapter committee change, and B, we just wanted to take those 3 lines out, and it's just a pull request that does exactly that. It removes the 3 line that here that says the POSIX read and F read and write F write are blocking non-calc operations and use individual file pointers. The MPI equivalents are file read and file write. And we didn't like the equivalent part, and we couldn't find out anything better, and as we didn't see the need for that, so we decided as a group to take those 3 lines out, and that's all the pull request does. This is not my chapter, so that's why I sent it to Tony for review as the IO chapter chair, and so the IO chapter should sign off on that and then hand it on to Bill.
Can I suggest that rather than commenting things out, we just remove them?
You can do that too, yeah.
Doing that in a lot of other places.
You can just take it out. That's fine with me.
Any other comments on this one? Okay, so Martin, you can make that little edit, but obviously we don't need to discuss that again. And we will file that away to be officially read in June, but we'll be able to get through it quickly.
It's just a chapter change we decided, right? So as long as Tony and his group signs up with it.
We had signed, or we had decided that was going to be an errata thing, actually.
Really? Then
Yeah.
okay, then we need to make this consistent. I'll update it. Okay. I misread it then, sorry.
Yep. No problem.
Okay, well,
chapter committee changes, and editor changes. We decided not to even have these unofficial readings unless people wanted more eyeballs.
That's why I was actually surprised you brought it up.
Okay, so that's everything from that list. So then the other thing, if people don't mind, that I was going to bring up was another issue that was raised from a user for once, not from me. Because we have users and we listen to them, and that's good. So this one is someone that was pointing out originally in the context of MPitch, but we pointed out that this is actually something that's missing in the MPI standard itself. We have lots of functions to add error classes, error codes, and error strings. Well, we have 3, I suppose. But we don't have functions to remove them. And so, like all good libraries, we should be able to clean things up when we create them. And so we should have the functions to be able to remove things when we add them. So this is a relatively simple proposal. It's just adding these 3 functions to be able to remove error classes, codes, and strings. So I have a pull request.
So those names need massaging, I think. The verb is in the wrong place for a start. And is that the right verb to use?
So these names do match what we already have with add error class, remove error, or add error class, error code, and add error handler. I'm aware that we do generally do MPI com set something or MPI com dupe or whatever. So you're right, it is a little different than the way we usually do things, but it is. I guess we've had this argument before, and perhaps I don't remember. Is do we want to be consistent, or do we want to be consistent about verb first or verb second, or do we want to be consistent about matching what we already have?
That's a tricky question.
Yeah.
I would like it to be consistent, but if there's two things to be consistent with, then we're losing, aren't we? Because we can't change the existing functions because backwards compatibility. We can add new ones that have the verb in the right place, but you know, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And then it's just, is it worth doing that just to swap the verb around? I don't know. So yeah, here's where that text lives. So just above it, we've got the MPI add error class function. And so it seemed very odd to say MPI error class remove in the next, on the next page.
Yeah, I get that.
All
I
right,
guess
I'll
there's
go ahead
also,
and
there's
go
also
ahead.
is remove the right word? Is there any precedence for using remove rather than say delete, or I don't know, something else? There's lots of other words that could be used.
Yeah, that's a good point. I know there are certainly places where we say delete, for instance, attributes. The other word we usually use is free. But in that case, I think we're usually allocating or creating as opposed to adding.
And free is dangerous because there is a huge semantic difference between win free and request free, for example. Win free and com free are not the same function, not the same semantic. So I think free is the wrong word. I wasn't advocating that, but I'm not sure what else. You know, delete is certainly something that's used. I'm not sure remove is anywhere. But you know, delete is delete with attributes is the converse of whatever we do to attributes to make them exist. I don't think is that add? I think that's create, isn't it? So maybe the converse of add in the standard should be remove. Again, you know, consistency with elsewhere. If we use add somewhere else and the converse of it is not remove, then we should probably follow that. But if there isn't an example of that, then you know.
I can't remember where we did something else. We did add.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just a you know, a sentence to justify to ourselves, and not necessarily in the document, but you know, a search through the functions to find out are there any other add functions, and if so, what are their converse? You know, what's the converse verb of that we use already? If there's multiple different things, we can choose from the set that we've already got or make something new up. But let's try and make it consistent if there is a precedent to follow.
So we say delete for attributes, and we say
So from what I can see quickly, we have one other function that has add in the name, and that's that the add stands for adding.
That doesn't count.
And add. So that's
sorry. What was that? Add. What was that, Martin?
A and add.
A and add.
Think of addresses together.
Yeah. So that's an actual yeah, an operation rather than a.
Correct. That's the only function I can find where where the three letters ADD are in it.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and in the case of info objects, we have create and delete as opposed to free.
We have free and delete. Delete is, I think, removing it from wherever you've applied.
Right.
Info. I mean, that's true with attributes. I'm not sure how that actually works with info, but at least with attributes, yeah, you put an attribute on an object and then you can delete it. But you still have to free the key val that you created. So create and free are the pair there.
So perhaps delete would be the better word here. That is a little closer to the info definition. That's a fair point. Okay, so I've got a note of that. I'll think about that some more and then make the changes, and we can discuss it on the pull request too. But I think that doesn't really change what's in the proposals. We can go ahead and read through that. So a lot of the text you're going to see here is pulled from other places with the add functions, particularly things you're going to see related to MPI last use error code. We do use a lot of the same text or the inverse of it when we're talking about removing things. So I'll read through that. And this, obviously, you can see does have the Pythonized bindings, and that worked great. So thanks for that. So the new function here is MPI remove error class, and it takes an error class parameter, which is the value of the error class to remove, and that is an integer. And for the description, this removes a user-created error class. The value of the predefined attribute key MPI last used code associated with MPI COM world is updated to reflect the maximum error class value. Note that there may be unused error classes that have a smaller value than MPI last used error code. For instance, if you create 5 error codes and then delete the first one, there's going to be a hole in that list. But that's already, I think that's already legal in the current definition of MPI last use code. So that shouldn't be a problem. It is erroneous to call, oh, so I'm sorry.
On line 13, should that be actually last used code like the other references, or is that a different thing? That's a different error.
That's a different thing.
Okay.
No, actually, I'm not sure it is a different thing. Let me go double check that. Sorry, there are a few things that have very similar names, but I think you're right. I think that is incorrect.
I would imagine that it is a different thing, and that below that value is the ones that are built in that you can't delete. That you
Yes,
should
I believe that is correct. Yeah.
So I think is last used code by its name. I would expect
It's right here.
Yeah, I would expect last used code to be the one that you most recently did something with, which wouldn't be updated to the
MPI
maximum.
last code is the last built-in one, and so that is erroneous.
Yeah. So the last used code, that's defined somewhere.
Yes.
Just above, I guess it's referenced. So I would be surprised. I'm sort of surprised that last used code is updated to the maximum error class value by this function. I would maybe.
So
Sort of
last
depends what
used
last
code
means.
is updated to be the last user. Well, the last code, whether it's user or built-in, MPI last code is the last built-in one. So last code never changes. Last used code does.
You mean it's the one with the highest value rather than the one that I most recently used?
Oh, yes, that's correct. There's nothing I can do about the poor naming.
Right. Okay, that's fine.
Yes, that is what it is intended to mean. Just to finish this up, it is erroneous to call MPI remove error class for an error class with a value less than or equal to MPI error last code. Yeah, so that's what this is intended to say. You can't remove an error class that is one of the built-in error classes. That's why it says MPI error last code. So that is correct. Okay, so now let's go down to the definition of remove error code. Very similar. Again, this takes an error code as input, which is an integer, and that is the error code to be removed. So this removes a user-created error code and all its associations with any error class. It is erroneous to call MPI remove error code for an error code with a value less than or equal to MPI error last code. And this, of course, evokes all of the confusion around error classes being error codes, but not vice versa. So you can pass in error class values as error codes, and that would normally be correct, but in this case you can't because you can't remove built-in ones. Okay. And
I think
then
you
the
need
final. Yep.
I think you need an additional change in the well, the window's gone. Where's that gone? There we are. There's an advice to users for the MPI add error code that talks about MPI last used code, and it says that it will not change unless the user calls the function to explicitly add an error class code. You're saying that it will change in other circumstances now. There, it can actually be decreased, or it can be changed in other
Should be
circumstances,
add or remove an error class code, correct?
or delete, or whatever you end up calling it. Yes.
Right. Okay, thanks. All right, so now down to the error string removal. So this is MPI remove error string. This again takes an error code because you're going to remove the string associated with that code. So you're describing the code or class that you want to remove the error string for. So this removes an association of an error string with an error class or error code or class. It is erroneous to call MPI remove error string for an error code or class with a value less than or equal to MPI error last code. Section 8.3 describes the methods for creating and associating error handlers with communicators, files, and windows. I think maybe that last text I didn't add and I just highlighted. Yeah, so this last sentence isn't new. That was already there. It's supposed to introduce the paragraph below, so I need to just add a paragraph break there or something.
I think you may also want to look at the beginning of 8.5. There's a list of, for this purpose, functions are needed too, and then one is add and two is associate error codes with classes. Then there's the table. Then there's 3 associate strings, 4 invoke error handlers and things. 5 should be remove. 5 and 6 maybe should be remove of each type.
Or just say for number 1, just add / remove.
Yeah, or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then under that list it says no functions are provided to free error classes or codes. It's not expected that an application will generate them in significant numbers.
Yep. Okay. Yeah. So should have done a little more reading around that. Sorry. Okay. I will just read this whole section again and make sure that the rest of that is consistent too. All right. So that's everything from my end for this one.
So Wesley,
changes. Yep.
One quick question. So what's the, perhaps sorry if I missed this, but what's the intended behavior if you call this with a code that is in the valid range but is not used?
You mean a user created code
that you have deleted already, for example, before, and you call it a second time?
That's a good question.
A code where you never added a string, that's the other thing.
Yeah, that's a good question. I would think that would just be erroneous and we should call that out.
I think it can either be erroneous or a no-op, right? One of the two. Or it can throw a very predefined failure, right? That's the other option.
Well, yeah, we could say MPI error arg, and that's what erroneous would be. If you pass this in, it is erroneous, and we would give you an appropriate error.
Right. That's probably worth mentioning somewhere what it will be.
There's also a bit of a race condition if you keep adding and removing codes or classes. You can get into a situation where different things thought that it meant different. The same code meant different things. It might be better to just leave the last used code as monotonically increasing, so that you never reuse one.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Theoretically, you would eventually run out when you hit max int, but that's a theory.
Okay. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I thought you were going to say that we needed to. I thought you were going to say something about being consistent across processes, but we don't guarantee that. So yeah, I think that's a good point. Maybe we should say that.
Yeah, I'm thinking
we
of.
had a similar discussion when we were going through this before about last code. Can you think of a reason why we didn't want last code to go down?
The last code never changes, right? Last use code.
MPI, sorry, last use code. So the definition I have on the screen now that I can't highlight because it'll highlight everything says instead of predefined attribute key, MPI last used code is associated with COM world, and the value is the current maximum error class, including the user defined ones. So we could change that to say the maximum error code, drop current, and make a few other tweaks to say this isn't going to go down.
Yeah, it would just be the maximum one that's ever been used in this run. It would. I think that gets rid of a lot of the race conditions. If two components are adding and removing error codes, they don't tread on each other's toes. You avoid the race condition because they'll get a unique value. And if they added another one, then they'd get a different unique value. They aren't going to replace the.
So one question then, though, I mean, the strings are a different story because they take resources, but why would we ever even remove an error class then if it's just not going to be returned anymore if it's not used? Or why do you want to actually explicitly tell MPI, nobody will ever use that error class again?
I have no idea what resources are set up behind the scenes to do that.
So a string I can see for an error class is just a number, right? It makes you take more resources to remember which error classes are. So what would an implementation, I think it's a question for the implementers, if you have such a routine and you have the requirement to always increment error classes, how would you implement this routine? Or would this really just be a no-op in the MPI library?
Probably, if you're just implementing this as an array, yeah, you probably would just make at least removing error classes. Well, I don't know. I mean, I can think of implementations where, and I don't remember the custom error class code in pitch well enough to answer the question, but I could certainly think of an implementation where associating error codes with classes, new error codes with classes, would take resources. They're very small resources that probably make no difference, but adding an error code would add something to an array somewhere. And if you ever added enough, you would have to allocate more space to continue adding more. And so you could, in theory, shrink that later. Again, it's a laughably small amount of memory, most likely, so it probably doesn't matter. Strings, I think, like you said, is a little more obvious where that would be a useful thing. But I think the argument of the person that submitted this was that because you have created something, you should have a way to free that resource. And so I think from a consistency perspective, it's a good idea. And it may be that most implementations turn this into a no-op or something, like that. But it's still the, quote unquote right thing to do anyway, because it's how libraries should behave when they create resources.
Yeah, the consistency argument or the completeness argument is certainly true.
So in OpenMPI, there is such an array as just as Wesley was describing, and the items that are added to that array contain the strings, so they're quite big actually. Well, they're not large, but they're more than just an integer.
So that's an array where you in dense form describe all the error codes?
Well, they contain a pointer to the error code object, which itself contains the string. So when you add an error code, you create all of these.
Okay. So you
Yeah,
couldn't.
and you would need to have pointers. Error codes and classes would have to be more than just integers, because you have to be able to associate them with each other, and same thing with strings. So yeah, it is going to be something that's more significant than just an integer array.
Yeah, in that sense, it makes sense. Okay. And then another question I had, so if you delete an error class or remove an error class that has a string attached to it, does it delete the string as well, or do you have to do that separately afterwards? Or do you have to do it before because the error class is no longer valid?
Let me go look at the definition of add string.
Yeah, do you have to delete all the codes that are associated with the class before you get rid of the class, or does it do it for you? And do you have to get rid of all the strings from all the codes before you get rid of those? You have to unwind it.
So in the definition of add string, we don't say who owns the memory associated with the string. We say it's a constant. So I think what I would read into that is that the user can do whatever they want with that string after this function is over, and we're going to make a copy of it. And so I think it's probably the same thing in reverse, that when we remove a string, it has no impact on any copies of that string you were holding.
That's not the question, I think.
That's not what I meant though. If you add an error code and a string to that, and then you remove the error code, does the MPI remove error code remove the string as well, or are you responsible for removing that string before you call the function?
So I think in that case, it would remove the string, at least any copy of that string that we stick into the struct associated with that error code. If you happen to use the same string elsewhere, that's a different thing. It might be worth calling that out to say removing an error code will also remove any associated strings with that error code.
Yeah, I think that if that's the intention, I would suggest to add that.
Yeah.
And also if you remove the class, does it remove all the codes that are associated with that class, and then all of the strings that are associated with all of those codes? That would be the neat, clean way of tidying up. It's probably doable very easily in the implementation, but getting the user to do that puts a lot of burden on them to unwind what they did.
Yep. Should do both. Okay. Yep. I can add those things as well. All right. Anything else? All right. Well, thanks for letting me run through that one. And that was everything on the list for today. Last call for anybody that wants to add anything else. And also, is there anything that somebody wants to discuss in a future meeting? So obviously, anything that somebody does that falls into that editor pass list, I'll automatically pick up and put in the next meeting. But if anybody has any slightly larger things like what I did today, we can add that as well. Either
And there has been a request from the semantics terms group to have a plenary in 2 weeks.
okay. We do still have a meeting next week, so if anybody wants to talk then, that's still open, but we can add that.
A request was specifically for in 2 weeks because next week doesn't work for them.
Right. Yeah, I haven't added all of the virtual meetings for the next few weeks onto here, but the plan is to at least hold the spot every week, and as long as we have something to discuss, we'll do it. If nobody has anything, then I'll cancel.
Yeah, I think it would be good to get through all these small changes one by one. So anybody who has time, please try to get a few a week off the board, and then hopefully by the time we hit the virtual meeting in June, or the exceptional virtual meeting in June, we will hopefully be through most of it. I think the most work is probably for the chapter committee chairs to go through these 7 or 8 chapter committee meetings tickets.
All right, that's everything for me. Any parting words, co-chair?
Nope, good for me.
Okay.
Thanks everybody.
Thanks for attending,
Joseph,
everybody. I
the
see
vote.
I've got a whole bunch of emails that are probably your votes. So thank you for those who have done it already. And for everyone else, please do so sometime today. And we will talk again next week.
Sounds good. Thanks everybody. See you next week.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.